You were just chilling and suddenly wondered, how can a computer turns on? Is there a magical genie inside? It's not like that. So how is it work? Well, it's quite complicated than we think. The moment you press the power button, your computer starts following a series of instructions. These instructions happen inside our computers without us even realizing it. For some people, this might seem useless or simply uninteresting. But understanding how a computer starts can actually be very useful. Some of you watching might agree with me, but some might not. So today, I'll explain how a computer turns on without making things too complicated. The moment we press the power button, the power supply unit or PSU begins supplying electricity to the motherboard and other computer components. Think of the PSU like the morning sun that signals everyone to wake up. The PSU converts AC electricity from your wall outlet into DC electricity that computer components can safely use. This is the reason your computer can even turn on in the first place. Once power reaches the motherboard, a small piece of software called firmware begins to run. This firmware is known as BIOS or UEFI. Their job is extremely important because they need to check whether your computer's components are working properly. You can think of BIOS as school principal inspecting every classroom before students arrive. Is the RAM working? Is the storage device detected? Is there any hardware failure? If a problem is found, the firmware might display an error message. If everything looks normal, the startup process continues. After finishing the checks, the firmware searches your storage device for something called a bootloader. A bootloader is a small program responsible for finding and loading an operating system. Think of it as a school security guard, deciding which students are allowed to enter this building. But what happens if there are two operating systems installed? In that case, the bootloader might display a menu like this. Once an operating system is selected, the bootloader loads the kernel into RAM and hands over control to it. The kernel is the core of an operating system. It manages memories, hardware devices, processes, security, and communication between software and hardware. If your computer were a company, the kernel would be the main manager coordinating every department. Without the kernel, the operating system simply won't function. Once the kernel is loaded into RAM, it begins loading other important parts of the operating system. The CPU then continuously executes instructions stored in memory. More and more system services begin to start. Eventually, your desktop appears, and your computer is finally ready to use. And all of this happens in just a few seconds. So the next time you press the power button, remember that millions of instructions are happening behind the scene just to bring your computer to life.